A single secret can become the most important thing in a case, and tonight, investigators are holding one close. They say they have a credible lead to where baby Emmanuel Haro's remains may be, but they're refusing to reveal the location. That silence is not indifference. It's a deliberate, tactical choice aimed at protecting evidence, preserving the chain of custody, and making sure whatever is found will hold up in court. Before we go further, hit subscribe and tap the bell so you get first-hand updates on this story as it develops. There's a lot at stake here, and when new verified facts emerge, you'll want to hear them from the people chasing the truth, not from rumors or social posts. What investigators have, and why they won't say where. Law enforcement officials now describe the lead as credible. That does not mean they've found a body, or even that they'll find one. What it does mean is their information, from cell phone records, surveillance checks, witness tips, or even a suspect's statement, converges enough to justify an organized, resource-heavy search. When police use the word credible, they mean the tip is specific, consistent with other evidence, and worth the type of planning that protects proof from contamination. But even a credible tip can be compromised by premature disclosure. If the public learns where investigators plan to dig, evidence can be disturbed, intentionally or not. People will go to the site to look, social media users will geotag it, and posts will encourage armchair detectives to converge on the scene. When that happens, biological traces, clothing fragments, or tool marks can be moved, trampled, or removed, and once evidence is contaminated it has little forensic value. That is why authorities will often say, simply and firmly, that revealing the specific location would do more harm than good. How contamination breaks a case. To someone watching from a distance, it may look like secrecy protects a story rather than the truth. The opposite is usually true. Forensic science depends on the integrity of the scene. A single footprint crossing a critical area, a cigarette butt tossed into a search grid, or even a flashlight beam that disturbs otherwise pristine soil can alter decomposition patterns or smear DNA traces. Defense lawyers seize on any sign that evidence was not handled properly, arguing reasonable doubt. If prosecutors can't show a clean chain of custody, who collected what, when, and under what conditions, then even the most damning physical find can be diminished or excluded at trial. That's why excavation is a slow, careful operation. It's why teams suit up in gloves and Tyvek and why every bag is logged and photographed before moving. It's why the presence of the public, even well-meaning onlookers, is the last thing anyone wants near an active forensic grid. The scene must be contained, documented, and sealed so that in court, when the defense tries to unravel the story, the prosecution can point to a recorded sequence of events and say with confidence, "This is how the evidence was handled from the moment it was discovered." Why mapping and containment take time? Investigators don't just show up with a shovel. They map and plan. They determine which part of a site to open first, how to sift through layers of sediment, how to collect fragile material, and what equipment to bring. That planning includes environmental assessments. Some areas contain pockets of methane, unstable ground, or sensitive wildlife concerns that require mitigation. Permits may be needed. Private landowners must be notified, sometimes quietly to avoid tipping off suspects, and specialized teams like forensic archaeologists, anthropologists, and cadaver dog handlers must be assembled. Each of these steps becomes more complicated if the site is a public place where crowds gather. So investigators restrict disclosure to a small circle who need to know, and they proceed when they have the legal authority and the logistical capacity to do the job right. Controlled conditions also matter for documentation. Every square meter of a search grid is photographed from multiple angles and often mapped via drone or total station surveying equipment. Samples are taken in a labeled sequence so that soil, insects, fibers, and biological stains can be analyzed in chronological order. If people wander into the grid, those relationships can no longer be trusted. Controlled conditions preserve context, and context is often the thing that turns a fragment into an answer. Why confidentiality filters out noise and false leads. Another practical reason for silence is the quality of the information flow. In high-profile cases, public disclosure can flood investigators with tips, many of them sincere but most unreliable. That deluge costs time, Each lead must be checked, each caller interviewed, and each scrap of potential evidence evaluated. By preserving confidentiality around a credible site, authorities filter out the noise. They can concentrate on verifying the lead against their own records, phone pings, surveillance footage, vehicle registrations, and witness statements. That focus prevents law enforcement from chasing wild goose chases and allows them to use scarce resources on leads that can be corroborated and that make logical sense within the emerging timeline. Filtering tips matters for legal reasons too. False or sensational leads often find their way into the public record and then into the courtroom as a kind of contaminant. Defense attorneys can point to public hysteria and argue that witnesses' memories were influenced by media coverage. Investigators avoid contributing to that dynamic by limiting what they disclose and by making sure their next public statement reflects verified progress, not unvetted speculation. When a suspect or a jailhouse confession points police toward a location, investigators don't take the statement at face value. They cross-check every detail against hard data. Mapping software plots possible routes. Telematics and GPS logs show where vehicles were at particular times. Cell tower records place phones near or far, and canine units run sweeps to detect the scent of a human or of decomposing matter. Often, an initial description will be vague, somewhere near the freeway, and the detective's job is to turn that vagueness into a search perimeter. This cross-checking process can be time-consuming. It's not uncommon for investigators to spend days validating a suspect's account before they commit to the kind of excavation that could cost thousands of dollars and require broad environmental disruption. They may make a dozen recon trips, line up aerial imagery, and consult with ecological experts to confirm the site's viability for a forensic dig. All this happens quietly, because revealing the exact path of verification is the same as revealing the site itself. Once an item is removed from a search site, it enters a documented chain of custody. That chain traces every hand that touched it. The collector, the evidence technician, the lab analyst, the officer who transferred it to storage. If the chain is broken at any point, the defense can argue that evidence could have been contaminated during the gap. That is a simple legal vulnerability with major consequences. To avoid it, investigators control access to the site and to the evidence, from the moment it's discovered until it's presented at trial. Chain of custody protocols also guard against claims of tampering. In cases with intense publicity, the suggestion that evidence was planted or mishandled can gain traction in public discussion, even if it's false. A solid chain produces paper and photo proof that every step was recorded, time-stamped images, sealed evidence bags with barcode labels, and signed transfer forms. Those records allow prosecutors to tell a straight, defensible story in court that links physical items to people and places in a way juries can trust. Why silence fights misinformation and rumor? When you withhold details, you deny rumor the oxygen it needs. In high-profile missing person cases, social media fills gaps loudly and often inaccurately. People invent motives, name suspects, and post alleged locations. Those false narratives can create significant collateral harm. Innocent people can be harassed, neighborhoods can be inundated with traffic, and the investigation itself can be muddied by false tips that redirect resources. Silence from law enforcement is a public-purpose decision. It aims to limit misinformation, protect potential witnesses and victims, and prevent the court of public opinion from shaping what should be a court of law. That's not to say silence is always perfect. The public understandably wants answers. Families of victims deserve information and transparency about key milestones in an investigation. Law enforcement tries to balance those needs. They often provide periodic public updates that confirm activity, search ongoing, certain persons of interest interviewed, warrants executed, while withholding the granular specifics that could jeopardize the process. The signals that a lead is tightening, why drones, dogs, and suspect involvement matter. You can read tactical escalation as a sign that leads are narrowing. Drones provide aerial images that help map terrain and reveal ground disturbances. Thermal imaging can show recent soil movement or hidden depressions, and orthomosaic imagery can precisely log the search grid. Cadaver dogs are trained to detect the scent of human decomposition and can indicate areas that merit more careful excavation. When handlers queue on a particular spot repeatedly, investigators take notice. Suspect involvement, whether that's escorted searches, admissions, or the court-ordered disclosure of information, similarly changes the calculus. If a suspect takes police to a general area or supplies a map, it suggests knowledge that needs verification. But even then, the hunt is measured. When dogs, drones, and human trackers converge on a location, it's because multiple lines of evidence point to the same place. Integrating historical records with new findings. Prosecutors aren't building their case only from what might be found in a field. They are integrating historical evidence to form a coherent narrative. That includes medical records, prior reports involving the family, phone metadata, financial transactions, and witness statements. If an excavation yields physical items, those objects gain meaning when tied to the larger timeline. A small piece of baby clothing, for instance, can be linked to purchase receipts or photos. Fibers can be matched to fabric remnants in a family vehicle. The investigative team's goal is to stitch together a timeline supported by both physical and documentary proof so that the story is not built on a single discovery but on converging proof. That integration explains the careful pace. A hurried announcement that we found evidence, without the paperwork to back it up, can be legally disastrous. Prosecutors know they must be able to present a chain of corroborating facts that translate into a clear narrative for a jury. That's why they work quietly to align the forensic discoveries with the documentary trail before making public statements about what was found. Silence is calculated preparation, not inactivity. The public must understand that investigators' silence is rarely a sign of stagnation. Behind that quiet there is planning, resource allocation, and legal positioning. Authorities are preparing search warrants with tight language, lining up forensic labs to handle analysis quickly, arranging secure storage for potential remains, and coordinating with environmental and archaeological experts so that any dig complies with regulations. They are also meeting with prosecutors to discuss whether any evidence should be preserved for trial and whether additional warrants are required to access nearby properties or digital records. When evidence is rushed and spoiled, or when public disclosure precedes solid verification, prosecutions can falter. Law enforcement has become more disciplined in recent years precisely because mistakes in the chain of custody or in the timing of disclosures have cost cases. The strategy now is to prioritize reliability over speed, to be right, not merely first. Silence often safeguards the evidence that will be needed most in court. Yes, the lack of public specificity is frustrating. Families and communities want answers. But the integrity of those answers depends on the conditions under which evidence is discovered and processed. Second, tactical escalation signals narrowing leads. When drones, dogs, and targeted searches converge, investigators are following a pattern of corroboration. Third, withholding site details reduces the risk of contamination and false claims that can derail a legal case. Finally, the approach reflects a commitment, imperfect but earnest, to build a case that will stand up under scrutiny rather than collapse under cross-examination. What you can do to help. If you have verifiable information, a dashcam clip with a clear timestamp, a photo that shows a vehicle at a specific place and time, a receipt or social media post that pins a person's location, don't post it on social media. Take it directly to investigators. The local homicide unit has hotlines and secure tip lines designed to accept evidence that can be used in court. Uploading items publicly risks spoiling them or producing a swirl of unhelpful speculation. Good tips preserved properly can reduce the size of a search area dramatically. That's how many successful recoveries have happened. This is hard for the family and hard for the community. People want closure. They want to know where Emmanuel is and what happened. But justice, the kind that can survive a trial and produce a legal reckoning, depends on evidence that can be shown in court. That's why investigators choose silence, to protect the science, preserve the chain of custody, and build a case that can, in time, answer the hardest questions. When investigators withhold the location of a possible remains site, they are almost always doing so to protect the integrity of the inquiry. The work that follows, mapping grids, securing warrants, using canine units and drones, and integrating historical records, is painstaking and slow by design. It's not an action, It's a commitment to doing the job in a way that keeps evidence admissible and the prosecution's case strong. For those who want to help, the best course is to share verifiable information with investigators, not on social media, and to trust that careful, patient work is more likely to produce a lasting answer than rushed announcements driven by speculation.